Hey guys, we are on our second lesson of the Civil Rights era. Yesterday, we left off with this photo about the sit ins and how abusive people were to those protesting segregation at the lunch counter. And like I said yesterday, it was black and whites that sat in on these protests, and they were all mistreated. So that's where we're going to pick up today. We're going to go to Freedom Riders. So we've got desegregation in education in the schools. We are Rosa Parks, desegregation on public transportation, the sit-in protest movement, desegregation at the lunch counter, and we're going to go back to desegregation riding buses. So our freedom riders were blacks and whites both. Um, even though there was a federal law that said, "Hey, no more segregation on the buses," people still found ways around it. And so these men and women, known as the Freedom Riders, were taking a stand. They were becoming the giant to fight against segregation. Unfortunately, they were met with violence, mob violence. Uh, Tires were slit, rocks were thrown at windows, and one very famous scene was firebombs were thrown inside the buses. So it's crazy the amount of abuse and persecution that went on. One public commissioner even sanctioned the KKK to meet freedom riders as they deboarded the bus and abuse them. His point was, I want to make sure it looks like a bulldog chewed them up. So, but they did. They became the giant. And were eventually going to be successful. Now, Martin Luther King wanted to go to the Deep South, so he went to Birmingham, Alabama, and he knew that his protest would probably lead to a violent response, and he was right. So he ends up getting arrested, and he's put in jail. And at the end here, one of the letters that he wrote while in jail, I want to quote it. It says, "Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality." When he gets out of jail, this is how protesters are greeted. They're greeted with clubs, fire hoses, nightsticks, and what they're doing is peacefully protesting. Even giants get hurt. This was from the Children's March, and the police would have these dogs attacking children. We always talk about statues too. Here's a statue in a park in Birmingham, Alabama today, commemorating that Children's March. Bottom line, what they wanted was desegregation. Bottom line, what they wanted was equality. And bottom line, what they wanted was the right to vote without being persecuted. So eventually, Martin Luther King will go to Washington, and you can see here about 250,000 people met in Washington to hear him speak. And this is where he made his famous speech, "I have a dream." I can't play it on this screencast. The quality is horrible. So if you would like to listen to part of it, that is right here. He's calling for freedom and equality for all Americans. And so let's look at what has been passed for African Americans. We can go all the way back to the 15th Amendment. 15th Amendment passed in 1870, so that all African Americans who are male have the right to vote. Okay, so shouldn't that be it? Well, it's not, because I told you before that people will always find loopholes. So we have to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which says, hey, you cannot intimidate or prevent anybody from voting. Okay, We had the 15th Amendment, but okay, we'll try this again. Then we have to pass the 24th Amendment, and we have to get rid of poll taxes. That says basically, oh, you want to vote? Okay, that's going to be $10. Oh, you don't have $10? Okay, well, I guess you can't vote. So we get rid of poll taxes. But wait a second, didn't we already have the 15th Amendment? Okay, we'll try again. And Dr. Martin Luther King was trying to convince Lyndon B. Johnson at this time that the most important issue that should be on the president's table was voting rights for African Americans. Lyndon B. Johnson in the beginning really didn't agree with that. He believed more in a poverty issue was going to be the biggest issue. And so he wanted to set voting rights aside. So he passes the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that makes segregation illegal. Okay. We kind of already passed that in Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. Okay, we'll try it again in 1964. And so segregation is made illegal. Citizens of all races are allowed in public facilities. And we're going to try to create equal opportunity in the workplace. Nothing about voting. What I'd like you to do is this clip right here. It's really short. Oprah Winfrey's in it in the movie Selma. Would love for you to get in the sway and watch it. Again, the recording is horrible on my screencast. But it is going to show you what the reality of voting for a Black person was, even though we had the 15th and 24th and the Civil Rights Act of 57 and 64. I want you to watch that. Go watch it now and see what it was really like. Fun fact, Dr. Martin Luther King did receive the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in civil rights. Received it in Oslo, Norway. Take it in. Take it in. I really hope you watch that video because it was good. After receiving it weeks later, he says, we are not asking, we are demanding the ballot. So the voting thing is still on the table, okay? And so he picked Selma, Alabama, because only 3% of Blacks were registered to vote there. And the sheriff there would arm and deputize white citizens to make the voting process even more difficult so they couldn't even get registered. It says, listen to this, they used cattle prods on them and clubs as these African Americans are protesting because they don't have the right to vote. And these cattle prods and clubs are even used on school children. So here's good old Selma, Indiana, a little bit more modern day. Very famous city, though, especially for its protests. Remember, this was a really good video. Okay, I'll quit mentioning it. So Dr. King, he's going to create a protest, peaceful, of course. And it's going to be the March for Freedom from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama, about 50 miles, and they're going to march it. About 600 protesters are going to march it. Now, this march was broken into 3 marches. The first one, probably being the most infamous, started on March the 7th, and it's also known as Bloody Sunday, in which 70 marchers were hospitalized and 70 more were injured. And basically what they were doing is they were walking across this bridge, and they were met with the military and police force from Alabama. And they said, hey, turn around. Well, we'd like to get through. No, turn around. We're going to give you 2 minutes to turn around. Organize your people and go home. Well, they didn't. And the nation watched on national television as these police officers brutally beat peaceful protesters. Brutally beat them. And I'll tell you what, this was a wake-up call for the nation because here they are watching it. And when the people get loud, the government gets involved. And Lyndon B. Johnson, he is beyond furious. But I'll tell you what, the sacrifice of those protesters that walked across the bridge that day led to a voting right for them. So great sacrifices were made that day. If you want to watch the real-time footage of that march, that's right here. If you want to watch the movie Selma's reenactment of it, just a little bit more graphic, you can watch that one. The second march, 2 days later, you can see here that they are met with the same police officers, but this time they turn around. If you want to watch that segment of the march, you can watch it here. This one's pretty short. But I'll tell you what, it was successful. By the time the people made it to the state capitol, there were 25,000 marchers. They marched about 12 miles a day and then slept in open fields at night. But remember, we started at 600 and now we're at 25,000 people that made it to Montgomery. That's pretty neat. And like I said, the biggest success here was Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Acts of 1965, which basically said, hey, you can't make them have a literacy test. And I'll tell you what, we're going to put federal election officials in the counties down here, and they can register African Americans to vote because your local officials are not registering them to vote. Federal government's now in charge. This was a huge success for the African Americans. Huge success. Were there sacrifices made? Absolutely. But guys, this was a big deal. All right, that is the end of lesson 2, guys. We got one more lesson after this.